In the Pokemon world, most lore is pretty straightforward. Some sort of incredible event happened a long time ago, a certain legendary Pokemon came into existence as a result, yada yada yada. Which hey, that's fine, it's a video game. I'm not expecting there to be scientific debate among scholars in this fictional world about the origins of certain creatures. But then, Kyurem came along and flipped Pokemon's normal agenda on its head. In more ways than one. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and today let's break down Kyurem and why it might just be one of the most fascinating legendary Pokemon of the modern age. Let's first begin with why Kyurem was created in the first place. Unlike Heatran, whose inspirations were a little more abstract, we can pretty plainly see that Kyurem was meant to be the third member of the Tao Trio, the fan-made term that refers to Zekrom, Reshiram, and Kyurem. It would be the Pokemon Gray to their Black and White. But just as Pokemon Black and White had defied standard Pokemon conventions with the decks of only new Pokemon, and a climax that pits the player up against Team Plasma rather than the champion, little did we know that the games coming next would defy even more expectations. As on February 26, 2012, instead of revealing the very expected Pokemon Gray version, instead, Pokemon's first sequel since Gold and Silver in 1999 were revealed. Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. In retrospect, I believe this was partially done because rewriting Black and White's story to focus on an entirely different legendary Pokemon would have already changed so much about the game that they may as well just make a new story entirely. It's not like in Sinnoh where Dialga or Palkia only show up at the very end of the story. Zekrom and Reshiram are referenced numerous times throughout the game, and most of the last third of the game focuses on the race between N and the player to obtain their respective stones and bring their legendary dragons back to life. To rewrite this with Kyurem as the focal point would have not been nearly as easy as it was to write Suicune, Rayquaza, or Giratina into their respective games' plots. Furthermore, using N and his dragon as plot points, they could very easily show off Kyurem's new fusion mechanic, while also making sure that players who stuck to both pairs of black games or both pairs of white games would receive both dragons. Huh, maybe that's why Zekrom and Reshiram were purposely mascots of the opposite version. Kinda weird. And on top of that, Game Freak apparently had the ideas for the memory link and key system features for quite some time already, and determined that they would have only really worked if Black 2 and White 2 were proper sequels rather than a typical enhanced version. It's really cool to think how far in advance this must have been planned out. But shifting back to Kyurem for a moment, we aren't told much about it in Black and White, much like the previous third version legendaries. When the player first arrives in Opelucid City, Drayden tells the story of the legendary dragons and briefly mentions how they were both once the same Pokemon. However, Kyurem is never explicitly mentioned in this exchange. And when Kyurem is later introduced in the postgame, the NPCs in Lacunosa Town tell a very different story, mentioning how Kyurem appeared in the Giant Chasm at the same time that a meteor struck the land several hundred years ago, leading the townspeople to believe that Kyurem was a ferocious alien who would abduct and eat people who were out after dark. Fun fact, the inspiration behind this story likely comes from the real-life Tunguska event that occurred in Russia in the early 1900s, where the shard of a comet formed a massive crater in the landscape and leveled all the surrounding trees, leading to numerous conspiracy theories about alien activities occurring there. It's like Russian Area 51, if you will. Because of this, the residents of Lacunosa Town built a large wall around their city. This is also why the town is called Lacunosa Town, because most towns in Unova are named after types of clouds, and Lacunosa's clouds resemble a net or a fence. Wow, who knew that you could learn meteorology from Pokemon? In other languages where Unova's town names aren't derived from clouds, Lacunosa Town's name almost always comes from some sort of interlacing or weaving concept, such as in the original Japanese, it's called Kagome Town, referencing the pattern woven into a bamboo basket. It's also one of the only towns in the Pokemon world where NPCs' positioning and schedules change drastically depending on the time of day, as they all go inside at night to stay safe from Kyurem. This is personally one of my all-time favorite Pokemon towns, not just because the music is boppin', but because it's one of the only examples where the threat of dangerous Pokemon actually affects the citizens' day-to-day lives. I mean, wouldn't your schedule be thrown off if you thought a man-eating alien lived next door? Speaking of which, let's go back to the alien theory for a second. In Black 2 and White 2, Drayden tells an expanded version of the Unova region's lore, this time directly including that Kyurem is likely the husk of the original dragon. And with all due respect to the lovely townspeople of Lacunosa Town, I think I'm more likely to side with the expert on dragon-type Pokemon history on this one. Oh, and we also see Kyurem fused with the two dragons firsthand, so that virtually confirms that theory. But even beyond this, if Kyurem was an alien, it would likely know either cosmic power or meteor beam. seeing as how Game Freak pretty intentionally makes sure that any extraterrestrial Pokemon knows these attacks. I mean, even Starmie can learn these moves, but not Kyurem. Personally, I have always thought of this as Game Freak's subtle way of confirming which Pokemon have alien origins and which do not. So, operating by that logic, I'd like to say that this is like the nail in the coffin for the alien theory, but realistically, it's more like the 6 feet of dirt on top of the coffin. So no, Kyurem is not an alien. But I actually do appreciate this contradiction in lore. This is probably how people in real life would treat a mythological creature living in their neighborhood. Just ask anybody in West Virginia. That ain't Mothman, that's a drunk guy going shooting with his buddies. They don't know what an original dragon is, they just know that the comet came and shortly afterward Kyurem was there too. Operating by Occam's razor, it's very believable that all the townspeople would just treat Kyurem as an alien. Now, there are some theories on the internet as to how these two events could be connected. One of the most popular being that the original dragon split into two while it was in midair, and the remains of Kyurem's body just so happened to plummet down like a comet outside of Lacunosa town. So the people perceived it as an alien even though it really wasn't. Professor Juniper even theorizes that the comets could have been made from the same material as the light and dark stones were. And I don't believe this was just a throwaway line. Perhaps the comet really was the origin of the original dragon, and Kyurem merely retreated to its birthplace after the split occurred. Though, if this was the case, you'd expect the 3 Unova dragons to have some of the aforementioned alien traits that all the other alien Pokemon have. I think more likely the icy comet altered the geography of the chasm, making it much cooler than the surrounding areas. And so, the wandering Kyurem, who had split off sometime before the comet arrived, finally settled in an environment cool enough to keep its power bound. Most likely, these were 2 unrelated events that the unknowing townspeople just lumped together. Hey, so normally this would be the part of the video where I ask you to subscribe if you're enjoying, which you totally should. But instead, I just wanted to say if you're going to Pokemon Worlds on Sunday, August 17th, me and my buddy Zactoshi are going to be having our own meet and greet at 11:30 a.m. We'll sign autographs, do pictures, we would absolutely love to meet you, so definitely come see us. We'll return to in-game lore in a moment, because there is still a lot more that I want to discuss. But for now, let's turn our attention to Kyurem's real-world inspiration. With Zekrom and Reshiram representing the yin and yang in Taoism, Kyurem is meant to represent Wuji, the absence of yin and yang. Which certainly makes sense with Kyurem's in-game lore describing it as a husk waiting to be filled with truth or ideals. Kyurem's body being a hollow vessel reflects the symbol used for Wuji as well, as Wuji is often depicted as an empty circle. The idea of absence is even reflected in their typings, where fire and electric are both hot burning energy sources, but Kyurem's ice typing is likely a reference to absolute zero, or the absence of energy. Again, this certainly aligns more with the original dragon theory than the alien theory, which if you still believe in that, just go ahead and tell me you're a flat earther while you're at it. So here we are now with one massive question left. What is the original dragon? The mix of yin and yang. It's never really made clear whether the original dragon is meant to be Kyurem's original form, or if it's a different Pokemon entirely. My guess is that given Kyurem's ability to fuse with Zekrom or Reshiram, but not both, the original dragon is likely an entirely different species of Pokemon unrelated to Kyurem. Kyurem, again, is just the husk, like Shedinja spawning from a leftover Nincada shell. Shedinja's not a Nincada form, it's a different Pokemon entirely. So if we do eventually get the original dragon, I don't think it's going to be Kyurem. This is a very rare case of a Pokemon being teased, but never being revealed. In Black 2 and White 2, many thought that Black Kyurem and White Kyurem were just there to hide the reveal of the original dragon that was teased in Black and White. Similar to how Duskmane and Dawnwing's Necrozma were there to hide the true form, Ultra Necrozma. Even in that vein, Ultra Necrozma is very different from the original dragon. Ultra Necrozma is Necrozma's true form. The base form of Necrozma that we are more familiar with is Necrozma in its weakened state. It's not an entirely new consciousness formed from the remains of its previous body like Kyurem is. And it almost feels like Game Freak is purposefully holding out on us. While Black 2 and White 2 gave us more lore about the original dragon, we never even got a chance to glimpse it in game. The anime never mentions the original dragon in any capacity. And in the Black and White manga, only a very abstract silhouette of the original dragon is shown to us, which likely isn't accurate. Even Kyurem's own movie, Kyurem vs. the Sword of Justice, does not give us anything. Believe me, I rewatched it for research purposes, and I didn't even need to do that. There was no research to be found. Because the plot of this movie is that Keldeo performs an egregious home invasion on Kyurem, and somehow we're supposed to believe that Kyurem is the bad guy. And Kyurem doesn't even need Zekrom or Reshiram to transform, it can just do it at will for no reason. It just sucks so bad. Sorry. Many believed that after Legends Arceus, Legends Kyurem would be next in line, finally diving into the unknown myths of the original dragon. But haha, nope, we're gonna have street fights in France! It's like they know it's the elephant in the room when it comes to Pokemon lore, and they're just holding on to the secret as long as they can. The only droplet of information we have about the original dragon may come from the recent Game Freak Terra Leak, where Game Freak's beta design was exposed to the public for the first time. If you don't want to be spoiled, I'll give you like 2 seconds before it pops up. It notably lacks its ice features, meaning it may predate the idea of Kyurem representing Wuji and still having some aspects of Zekrom and Reshiram within it. And it is predominantly purple, the combination of Zekrom and Reshiram's blue and red energy. It looks more like a mix of yin and yang rather than the absence of them. While it's just an early beta design and probably would have not looked exactly like this in the final game, it certainly seems to evoke a more original dragon feeling than a Kyurem feeling. In fact, the only features Kyurem seems to have retained from this beta design are its yellow eyes and tendril-like wings that are normally covered in ice, used to absorb Zekrom and Reshiram as we see in the climax of Black 2 and White 2. Because of all this lore and contradictions and mysteries yet to be solved, Kyurem is quickly becoming one of my favorite legendary Pokemon. It feels like one of the few modern-day Pokemon where Game Freak is willing to hold their cards close to their chest and leave us to speculate on what it really is. Whether it's through purposefully withholding the original dragon design or even planting contradictory lore within the games, it almost makes Kyurem feel like this larger-than-life mystery, which is something that has been missing in some of the more modern-age Pokemon games. I'm hopeful that one day we'll see the original dragon for what it really is. But for now, I appreciate Kyurem and the original dragon for being one of the last great mysteries that this series has to offer. So what do you think? Will we eventually see the original dragon? Let me know in the comment section down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.